Syria's Assad says conflict could spread to Jordan. Assad said on Wednesday that thousands of fighters had crossed into Syria from Jordan to battle government forces and warned that the conflict could spread to Jordanian territory. Says the fire will not stop at our border and everybody knows that Jordan is exposed as Syria is. U.S. plans Syria invasion via Jordan with 20,000 soldiers. Maybe this is what Syria's Assad was talking about. In regards to Jordan, the U.S. military is deploying more forces to Jordan as part of a plan to dispatch 20,000 more soldiers there in a bid to invade Syria under a pretext of securing the country's chemical weapons arsenal. The Pentagon is sending nearly 200 troops from the 1st Armored Division to establish a small headquarters, they say, near Jordan's border with Syria, and a plan of potential military operations, including a rapid buildup of American forces if the White House decides intervention is necessary, according to the LA Times, reporting on Thursday, citing U.S. officials. The move marks the first deployment that American military officials have explicitly described as a possible step towards direct military involvement in Syria. I found it kind of interesting because we were just talking about this recently, about possibly tying these recent terrorist attacks to Syria, Yemen, or homegrown right-wing domestic terrorists. But I also made the comment that as of like the last couple of days, the whole time during the Syrian, quote, uprising, the West or the White House, their official policy has been non-intervention. Of course, we know that they're arming and aiding terrorists inside Syria, and mostly from outside Syria, to come into Syria to wreak havoc and isolate Assad to step down. But now they're trying to get control. That was what we were talking about on the other report the other day, which was that now the United States is trying to get control of the Islamic extremists that they use as a proxy army, mostly for Zionist Israel. That's at the behests of them doing their dirty work. So now, again, you're going to have the American army go over there and spill blood for Zionist Israel, because this is exactly part of the plan. I almost wonder if this terrorist attack in Boston has something to do with Mossad or Israel, and basically sending the U.S. a message, like they always do with the Sandy Hook massacre, trying to disarm Americans. So they carry out all these PSYOP shootings. We have here U.S. troops staged in Jordan to defend al-Qaeda in Syria. The massive U.S. arms aid deliveries prop up al-Qaeda in Syria, while U.S. troops stage in Jordan to defend terrorists they spent the last decade fighting. It says here that these troops that we're talking about are staged along Syria's border. It reveals that huge amounts of U.S.-provided flour smuggled into Syria have formed the foundation of al-Qaeda's public relations strategy. Together with huge amounts of U.S.-provided weapons, the aid is fueling al-Qaeda's continued operations and atrocities inside Syria, including the recent chemical weapons attack that was by these same, quote, rebels, and to be blamed on the Syrian government. The addition of the U.S. troops along Syria's border appears to be a response to recent and significant gains made by the Syrian government in stamping out terrorist operations nationwide. President Assad says no to surrender and no to submission. He stressed on Wednesday that the West will pay a heavy price for financing al-Qaeda in Syria, in the heart of Europe and the United States. In an interview with Syrian state television, Assad said the West is playing with fire and that the conflict could also spill over into Jordan, saying that the West has paid heavily for funding al-Qaeda in its early stages. Today it is doing the same in Syria, Libya, and other places, and will pay a heavy price in the heart of Europe and the U.S. He says he assured that from the first day what is happening in Syria is dictated from abroad. We're facing a new war, a new method, with fighters, some of whom are Arabs, not Syrians, the president said in the interview, adding that the army is not fighting a war to liberate Syrian territory, but a war on terror. Insisted that everyone who carries weapons and attacks civilians is a terrorist, be they al-Qaeda or not. Says there's a bid to invade Syria with forces coming from the outside of different nationalities, though they follow a new, different tactic from those followed by those who came to colonize the region, and from those used by the United States to occupy Iraq and Afghanistan. Lastly, there is an attempt at cultural colonization. That's important that he's using that phrase, cultural colonization, meaning ideological invasion in Syria, leading in one of the two directions. Either Syria becomes subservient and submissive to the big powers in the West, or it becomes subservient to obscurantist extremist forces, basically. We need to hold on ever more strongly to the meaning of independence. So it goes on, it says the position of the president has no value without popular backing. The people's decision is what matters in the question of whether the president stays or goes. This is my website here, ggnonline.com, our global government news. There's a poll, you can go check it out. And all the links should be posted in YouTube's video description probably tomorrow, because I'm going to do about 4 or 5 videos tonight. So, but I have a news archive. You can subscribe as well. Syrian forces capture a strategic village in Homs. The troops have reportedly seized a strategic village in the central province of Homs as the army continues clearing operations against foreign-backed militants. They say the latest victory for the Syrian army is hoped to hamper the movement of these militants between the western city of Qazyar and the provincial capital Homs. Then we have Britain and France say Syria use chemical weapons. They want the UN to launch broad investigation. They say Assad has indeed defied repeated U.S. warnings not to use weapons, say France and Britain. It's funny that says the European nations are pushing the UN to launch a wide investigation, when in fact it was the Syrian government that first called for the UN to do a kind of investigation or probe into these chemical attacks, which they blamed on these militants that the West is funding. But what the UN wants to do, and it says here, the UN is trying to organize one, but the issue is stalled over how big its scope should be. Syria, with the backing of Russia, says it will allow only a narrow one that focuses solely on Aleppo incident, because they want to go through their entire country. They want to start nitpicking and policing and trying to find something that they can pin on the government and completely avoid the atrocities that are taking place in that country. So, Israel's set to hit Syria rebels over arms. So this is where it's really coming from, right? This is the man behind the curtain, like we said. Zionist Israel. Yeah, Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering an operation to prevent Syria's chemical weapons and other advanced weapons from falling into Islamist hands. So they use Islamists to do their dirty work for regime change, create instability, cultural invasion, and then at the same time, these same groups are improvising with some kind of chemical weapons and killing civilians, and then they're saying that they're worried about the chemical weapons getting into the hands of these extremists that they're funding and backing, and it's just pure insanity. So, it's propaganda because we've been covering this. If you watch GGN periodically, you know that that the Syrian government under Assad is not falling. Their morale is still pretty high, and they're not falling to the West. So when they say this crap, it's not true. It's complete psyops, according to the Brookings Institute Policy for Regime Change. It says here that they're concerned here around the Golan Heights. They want to launch a military operation to prevent the weakening Damascus regime's chemical and other advanced weapons from falling into the extremist hands. This is kind of funny, too. That heightens fears that the Jewish state is edging closer to getting dragged into the Syrian bloodbath. Ooh, they're getting dragged into it because they have nothing to do with it. Yeah, it's, like I said, Syrian opposition leader Moaz al Khatib calls on al-Nusra to renounce al-Qaeda. So this is a complete joke again. If you don't have your head up your ass, you know that this doesn't make any sense. These are both, basically, al-Nusra is an offshoot of al-Qaeda. So, and they're the ones that are blowing cars up, taking credit for it outside schools and blowing up civilians, so blaming them on the government. The leader of the primary U.S.-backed Syrian opposition group, who criticized the United States last year for designating the rebel Nusra Front a terrorist organization linked to al-Qaeda, now is urging al-Nusra's fighters to break ties with al-Qaeda. Remember, both of them, the leaders, just said, okay, let's join and let's fight together. Nice, big, happy family. So, they're talking about this Moaz al Khatib. So, again, he's the head of the Syrian opposition coalition. This is, coming out of the United States and London. So, I wouldn't put too much credit into what he says. He's saying, honestly, he says, for one example, one group has banned smoking. I believe smoking is un-Islamic, but is this any priority right now? So, what he's referring to is this. He said here he's calling on al-Nusra leaders to stop trying to impose religious law in areas of Syria that they control. We're talking about Sharia law. Syrian rebel council to impose moderate Sharia across the territory aims to counter more harsh bans imposed by other factions. It says here, but what exactly Sharia law is differs widely across the Sunni spectrum, and the different Islamist rebel factions are imposing their own conflicting brands across the region. Al-Nasr's Taliban-style strict religious conservatism seems to be a tough sell in a lot of towns in the traditionally secular-driven nation, and is leading rebel fighters to violently enforce the laws, particularly as they relate to non-Sunnis, that's mostly Shiites and the Alawites and Christians and probably even Jews, and non-Muslims. And a day before the Boston bombings, there was a statement by the White House, coming out of the White House from the president on Israeli Independence Day, celebrating the 65th anniversary on the founding of the State of Israel. I join my fellow Americans in wishing the Israeli people a joyous Independence Day. It says here 65 years ago, the Jewish people realized their dream of the ages to be masters of their fate and their own sovereign state. From that moment on, a free and independent Israel has had no greater friend and ally than the United States. As I said during, we're talking about, really they're talking about the Zionists inside the United States back around the Balfour Agreement when that was signed. As I said during my visit to Israel last month, our two nations stand together because it makes our countries safer, our companies safer, stronger, and more prosperous, and it makes a world a better place. So you couldn't make that crap up. He said he always cherishes basically the visit and his time at Mount Herzl. He was honored to pay tribute to Theodore Herzl, who did so much to realize the dream of an independent Israel. So, and you go on and you say, who is Theodore Herzl? Well, he is actually an Austrian Zionist. That's right. He's the founder of the political form of Zionism, a movement to establish a Jewish homeland. And this is a subject that I've been learning more about in the last couple of years. I didn't know too much about it when I started GGN, but it's something that to me is very blatant and obvious. So I feel like compelled to talk about it. Which is when they talk about a political form of Zionism, it's basically saying it's talking about Jewish supremacism as if it didn't exist before. So, and that's why the Holocaust was such, I hate to say it, a great thing, because this was, part of a plan by Zionists to create their own homeland, so nobody can ever criticize Jewish supremacism. And that's where you see, when you see that stuff coming about right-wing extremists, mostly Christians and white people in America, it's usually coming from them. Because they themselves, that's it. It's just them, it's Israel first. But for everybody else, it's immigration, open immigration. It's fragmenting cultures and societies. But they themselves, they can't be harmed by that. Actually, they're the supremacists, and the people that are trying to, they call white supremacists, and mostly Zionist-run media outlets call them white supremacists. They're just people that want to maintain their culture and their heritage and their race like they do. They don't hate other people. They don't think they're better than anybody else. But they're very smart when they play psychological games. Go and read all the little quotes and stuff about the elders of Zion, the protocols for the elders of Zion, the high elders and that. And they basically talk about the Goyim and how they're crap and how they look at us, how they're going to use us as useless idiots. And they're doing it very well because people are naive. Israel's booming economy puts billions in U.S. aid under spotlight. We covered this already. Boosted by newly discovered natural resources, Israel is surging ahead economically, a success that is pushing the issue of the country's $3 billion in annual aid from the United States onto the agenda. So they're going to be making a lot of money off this. And they're wondering, okay, well, why do they need so much money from the U.S. taxpayer? U.S. to give Israel another $400 million for Iron Dome system, $1.5 billion in U.S. aid for scheme so far. So then next up we have Gantz claims Zionist entity can invade Iran. The Israeli military chief claimed that Israel can invade the Islamic Republic of Iran on its own. So it goes on and it says that these remarks come from a public radio on Tuesday. So as we have our plans and forecasts, if the time comes, we'll decide on whether to take military action against Iran. So they say this a lot, we'll see, right? U.S. Senate says we'll back Israeli attack on Iran. Foreign Relations Committee of the U.S. Senate, which basically doesn't answer to taxpayers or voters, they answer to private think tanks and consortiums like the CFR, votes in favor of a resolution that the U.S. will support Israel in case it was forced to take military action against Iran, right? That's how they always play that game. Kerry blames Iran for attack on Iraq camp. So this is complete crap of what they're doing here, blaming it on Iran. What they're doing, they're carrying out psyops before the election before the elections take place in Iraq. Start blowing shit up like in Pakistan and other places. And I guess we'll come back with this article here. An anti-Israel obsession permeates very distant societies divorced from our reality. This is GGN and I'm Darko. Thank you.